The air was thick with tension as we sat around the dinner table. Dad had insisted on having a family night, which usually meant he had something on his mind. I glanced at Leo, my husband, who seemed just as uneasy as I was. "So how's the shop doing?" Dad asked, his tone already carrying a hint of condescension. Leo cleared his throat. "It's been a little slow lately, but we're managing." Dad let out a dismissive snort. "Figures. You never did have the business acumen your brother had." I felt Leo tense beside me, his jaw clenching. Here we go again. "Gregory, that's enough," I said, trying to defuse the situation before it escalated. But Dad wasn't done. "If only you'd listened to me and taken that management job instead of chasing your little auto dream." He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "Your brother would have known what to do." Leo slammed his fist on the table, making the plates rattle. "Don't bring Tim into this." "I'm just stating facts," Dad shot back. He was the smart one, the one with a real future. "Screw you, old man," Leo shouted, his face flushed with anger. "I'm sick of living in Tim's shadow." The kids stared wide-eyed, their food forgotten. I reached for Leo's hand, trying to calm him down, but he jerked away. "At least he didn't waste his potential like you," Dad sneered. "Maybe if you'd inherited his drive, you wouldn't be struggling to keep that rust bucket of a shop afloat." That did it. Leo shot up from his chair, his hands trembling. "You know what? I'm done. I've had it with your constant belittling and favoritism. Tim's gone, and it's time you accepted that I'm not him." Dad rose to his feet as well, his eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you speak to me like that, after everything I've done for this family?" "Everything you've done?" Leo let out a bitter laugh. "You mean like constantly reminding us how much of a disappointment I am? Thanks, but no thanks." I stood up, trying to intervene. "Guys, please, let's just—" But they were too fond, exchanging insults and accusations that cut deeper with each passing moment. As their voices rose, echoing off the walls, I realized this was more than just another argument. This was a breaking point, a long simmering resentment finally boiling over. And in that moment, I knew our family would never be the same. A few days had passed since the explosive dinner, and an uneasy silence had settled over our home. Leo and I treaded carefully around each other, both of us still reeling from the fallout with Dad. I was in the kitchen, absent-mindedly scrubbing dishes, when the doorbell rang. Drying my hands, I made my way to the front door and peered through the peephole. It was Dad. I steeled myself and opened the door, bracing for another confrontation. "What do you want?" Dad's expression was uncharacteristically somber. "We need to talk." "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied coolly. "You made your feelings pretty clear the other night." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I know, and I'm sorry for how I acted, but I have a proposal that could help us all." I crossed my arms, skeptical. "I'm listening." "With your mother gone, it gets lonely living by myself," he began. "And with Leo's shop struggling, I thought perhaps I could move in and lend a hand. Financially." I blinked, taken aback. "You want to move in? And give us money?" "Think about it," he pressed. "With my savings, I could help Leo get that loan he's been after. Get the shop back on its feet." It was a tempting offer. Money had been tight lately, and Leo's business was hanging by a thread. But after the way Dad had treated him, I wasn't sure if we could trust his motives. "I don't know, Dad," I said hesitantly. "After everything that's happened, how can we be sure this isn't just another way for you to meddle and criticize us?" He held up his hands. "I give you my word, no strings attached. This is a fresh start for all of us." I studied his face, searching for any hints of deception. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Let me talk to Leo about it," I said finally. "We'll think it over and let you know." Dad nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Of course. Just remember, I'm not getting any younger, and I want a chance to make things right before it's too late." As he turned and walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his proposal than he was letting on. That night, I broached the subject with Leo over dinner. "Your dad wants to move in?" he said incredulously. "And bankroll the shop?" I nodded. "That's what he claims, at least." Leo shook his head. "I don't trust him, Mara. Not after the way he's treated me all these years." "I know," I agreed. "But if he's serious about the money, it could be our only chance to save the business." Leo was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. I guess we don't have much choice, but the second he starts meddling or pulling any of his usual crap, he's out. Understood? Understood, I said, hoping against hope that we weren't making a grave mistake. Little did we know, the real nightmare was just beginning. It didn't take long for Dad to move in, and almost immediately the atmosphere in our home shifted. His presence was suffocating, like a dark cloud hanging over us at all times. This place is a mess, he grumbled, surveying the living room with disdain. Didn't your mother teach you how to keep a proper house? I bit my tongue, reminding myself that getting into it with him would only make things worse. As the days went by, it became clear that Dad's no-strings-attached promise was nothing but empty words. He constantly criticized how I ran the household, from the way I cooked to how I disciplined the kids. You're too soft on them, he'd snap, glaring at me across the dinner table. No wonder they're so ill-behaved. The kids, sensing the tension, retreated into their rooms whenever Dad was around, only emerging when he wasn't home. Leo bore the brunt of Dad's derision, though. No matter how hard he worked at the shop, it was never good enough. I'm pulling in extra hours, trying to catch up on the backlog, Leo said one night, his voice weary. Dad scoffed. And how's that working out for you? Still can't seem to get ahead, can you? At least I'm trying, Leo shot back, his temper flaring. Which is more than I can say for you and your financial support. In a flash, Dad's expression turned thunderous. Watch your tone, boy. Don't forget who's keeping this sinking ship afloat. I stepped between them, dreading another explosive confrontation. Enough, both of you. We're all on edge, but fighting isn't going to solve anything. For a moment, it looked like Dad was going to press the issue. Then his face relaxed into a sickening smile that sent chills down my spine. You're right, Mara, he said, his voice deceptively calm. We're family, after all, and families should stick together, no matter what. The way he said those last few words, it was almost like a threat, a reminder that he held all the cards and we were at his mercy. In the following weeks, Dad's behavior only grew more erratic and disturbing. He'd make cryptic comments hinting at some deep, dark secret that could tear us all apart. You think you know someone, he'd say, his eyes boring into mine. But the truth is, we all have skeletons in our closets. I tried to brush it off, but his words gnawed at me, planting seeds of doubt and dread. What was he hiding? And more importantly, how far would he go to keep it buried? One night, I overheard a heated argument between Dad and Leo in the living room. Unable to resist, I crept closer, straining to make out their words. Can't keep living like this, Leo was saying, his voice strained. He's making our lives a living hell. Dad's response sent a chill down my spine. You'd better watch yourself, boy. You have no idea what I'm capable of. In that moment, I knew we were dealing with more than just a difficult house guest. This was a man willing to do whatever it took to maintain his twisted hold over us. And as I retreated back upstairs, my heart pounding, I realized we were in way over our heads. The tension in our home had become unbearable. Every interaction with Dad felt like a ticking time bomb, liable to explode at any moment. I walked on eggshells, never knowing when his next outburst or veiled threat would come. One afternoon, while the kids were at school and Leo was working late at the shop, I decided to tidy up Dad's room. As I straightened up his nightstand, a loose floorboard caught my eye. Curious, I bent down and pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Inside was a tattered notebook, its pages yellowed and worn. Against my better judgment, I opened it and began to read. The entries detailed Dad's gambling habits, how he'd squandered away large sums of money at the casino, chasing increasingly risky bets. My heart sank as I realized the extent of his addiction and how deeply in debt he must have been. But it was the final entry that made my blood run cold. The money for Leo's loan is gone, it read in Dad's shaky scrawl. I couldn't stop myself. I've ruined everything. They'll never forgive me for this. I sat there, numb, as the pieces fell into place. Dad's insistence on moving in, his constant belittling of Leo. It was all a ploy to make amends for betraying his own son in the worst way possible. Suddenly, his veiled threats and erratic behavior made sense. He was a man consumed by guilt and desperation, lashing out in a futile attempt to regain control. I don't know how long I sat there, the weight of Dad's betrayal crushing down on me. When I finally rose to my feet, my hands were trembling and I felt nauseous. That night, when Leo came home, I could barely look him in the eye. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I tell him the truth, that his own father had stolen from him, dashing his dreams out of sheer selfishness? "Mara?" Leo pressed. "You're scaring me. What happened?" Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. "It's your dad. I found something in his room today. Something he's been keeping from us." I proceeded to recount what I'd discovered in the notebook, watching as Leo's expression morphed from confusion to disbelief to a white-hot rage. "That son of a bitch," he seethed, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "After everything he's put me through, this is how he repays me? By stealing from his own flesh and blood?" "Leo, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I had no idea he'd stoop this low. "Don't apologize for him," Leo spat. "He's the one who should be groveling, begging for forgiveness. But he won't get it. Not from me. Not after this." As he paced the room, his anger radiating off him in waves, I knew there was no going back. The fragile truce we'd formed with Dad was shattered beyond repair. And in that moment, I made a decision, one that would change the course of our family forever. "We can't let him get away with this," I said, my voice steely with resolve. "It's time we fought back. It's time we took our lives back from that miserable old man." Leo looked at me, his eyes burning with a mix of pain and determination. "What did you have in mind?" A plan was already taking shape in my mind, a way to expose Dad's lies and machinations to everyone he'd ever wronged. "Trust me," I said, placing a hand on his arm. "By the time I'm done, he'll finally get the karma he deserves." In the days following my discovery of Dad's betrayal, a fire was lit within me. I couldn't stand idly by while he continued to manipulate and undermine our family. It was time to take him down, once and for all. The first step was gathering allies. I knew I couldn't take on Dad alone. His web of deceit ran too deep. I needed people who had seen firsthand the kind of man he truly was. My first stop was the auto parts store downtown, where I tracked down Mark, an old friend of Leo's late brother Tim. He and Dad had been close once, before a bitter falling out that nobody dared speak of. "Mara?" Mark's eyes widened when he saw me. "It's been years. What brings you by?" "It's about your ex-friend, Gregory," I said, getting straight to the point. "The lies, the manipulation, the way he treats Leo and the rest of us. I'm guessing you know all about that." Mark's expression darkened. "That son of a bitch. After what he did to Tim, I'm not surprised he's still up to his old tricks." "Then you'll help me expose him?" I pressed. "Make him pay for all the lives he's destroyed?" Mark was silent for a moment, mulling it over. Finally he nodded. "You know I'm in. That bastard has it coming, and then some." With Mark on board, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. If anyone knew the depths of Dad's depravity, it was him. Next, I reached out to some of Dad's old poker buddies, the ones he'd inevitably swindled money from over the years. One by one, they agreed to join my cause, each with their own score to settle. As my makeshift alliance grew, so did my confidence. We spent nights poring over evidence, building an airtight case against Dad that would leave no room for doubt or denial. "The key is to hit him where it hurts most," Mark advised. "His ego, his reputation, his sense of control, that's what matters to scumbags like him." And then it hit me. The perfect way to bring Dad's world crashing down around him, while ensuring maximum public humiliation. His 70th birthday party. Every year, Dad made a big production out of his birthday, inviting all his old friends and former associates for a lavish celebration. This time, we'd be the ones delivering the surprise. "We'll gather everyone who's ever had a bone to pick with that miserable old coot," I told the group. "Friends, family, business associates, the whole lot. And then, right in the middle of his big night, we'll spring the truth on him." The looks on their faces said it all. This was the reckoning Dad had been due for years, maybe decades. By the time we were done, he'd have nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. As the party date approached, the anticipation was palpable. We triple-checked every scrap of evidence, every witness testimony, leaving no stone unturned. Finally, the night arrived, and I could barely contain my nerves as guests began to trickle in. Dad, oblivious to our plot, greeted them all with his usual false bravado, soaking up the attention like a narcissistic sponge. Little did he know, his reign of terror was about to come to a crashing halt. Once we were done, there would be no more lies, no more manipulation, only the cold, hard truth, laid bare for all to see. I caught Mark's eye from across the room, and he gave me a subtle nod. It was go time. Steeling myself, I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and prepared to unleash a lifetime's worth of secrets and betrayals. "Excuse me, everyone? There's something you all need to hear." The room fell silent as all eyes turned towards me. Dad's expression morphed from confusion to outright suspicion. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "For years, you've lied, manipulated, and betrayed everyone in this room," I began, my voice ringing out clearly. "You've stolen money, ruined lives, and passed it off as tough love. But no more. Tonight, the truth comes out." A murmur rippled through the crowd as I held up the tattered notebook, the damning evidence of Dad's gambling addiction and subsequent betrayal. In these pages, you'll find a detailed account of how Gregory Sanderson systematically squandered away his life savings, including the money meant for his son's business loan, I said, letting the weight of those words sink in. Dad's face had drained of all color. "Mara, you don't know what you're talking about," he sputtered. "That notebook is nothing but lies." "That's not all." Mark stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "How about the way you turned your back on Tim in his time of need? Or how you've made Leo's life a living hell, tearing him down at every turn?" Other voices began to chime in, a chorus of accusations and grievances that had been bottled up for far too long. "You cheated me out of my retirement fund in that crooked poker game. You sold my business out from under me when times got tough. After Mom died, you became a completely different person. Cruel, vindictive, utterly heartless." Dad swiveled wildly, trying in vain to deny each and every claim, but we had him cornered, backed into a corner by the weight of his own misdeeds. "This is outrageous," he roared, his face flushed with impotent rage. "I'm your father, damn it! You can't treat me like this." In that moment, I felt a surge of pity for the pathetic, broken man before me. This was his true legacy, a lifetime of burned bridges and shattered trust, all in service of his own bloated ego. "We're done being your punching bags," I said, my voice heavy with finality. "You've tormented this family for the last time. Please, you have to understand." Dad blubbered, his bravado evaporating as he cast a desperate look around the room, searching for any shred of sympathy or support. But he found none. Only the cold, impassive stares of a dozen people he'd wronged, their respect for him shattered beyond repair. "Get out!" Leo spoke up, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Get out of our home. Get out of our lives. You're dead to us." A heavy silence descended as Dad's gaze met mine, his eyes pleading for mercy. But I felt nothing, no pity or remorse, only a sense of grim satisfaction that justice had finally been served. With one final, defiant glare, Dad turned and stormed out, the smattering of jeers and laughter following him out the door. We'd done it. Against all odds, we'd torn down the facade and exposed the monster underneath for all to see. As the crowd erupted into raucous cheers and applause, I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The nightmare was finally over. Dad's reign of terror had come to an end, undone by his own hubris and greed. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, like a crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders. As Leo pulled me into a fierce embrace, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together, united as a family, free from Dad's toxic influence at last. It was a new beginning, paid for with the truth and the unraveling of a lifetime's worth of lies. And it was all worth it. In the aftermath of Dad's humiliating exposure, an eerie silence settled over our home. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted, allowing us to breathe freely for the first time in years. Leo and I sat on the couch, still processing the events of the night before. The kids were at school, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. "I can't believe it's really over," Leo murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything he put us through." I squeezed his hand, offering a reassuring smile. "We did what we had to do. He brought this on himself." A knock at the door made us both tense, old habits dying hard. Leo rose to answer it, hand poised as if ready for a confrontation. It was Mark, a grim look etched onto his weathered features. "You guys better see this," he said, holding up his phone. On the screen was a news article, the headline blaring in bold letters, "Local businessman disowned after sordid scandal exposed at birthday party." Leo and I leaned in, devouring every scathing detail. It seemed one of Dad's so-called friends had tipped off the local paper about the events of the previous night, spilling all the sordid details of his deception and betrayal. The article didn't hold back, painting a damning portrait of a once-respected man brought low by his own greed and cruelty. By the time we reached the end, a sickening knot had formed in the pit of my stomach. "They're crucifying him," Leo muttered, his expression unreadable. A part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing that Dad was finally being held accountable for his actions. But another part couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. This was a man I'd once looked up to, a father figure now reduced to a cautionary tale. In the days that followed, the fallout only intensified. Old friends and associates cut ties with Dad, his reputation in tatters. Even his own remaining family members wanted nothing to do with him, disgusted by his betrayal. He tried reaching out, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails pleading for a chance to explain himself. But we never responded, never opened that door again. As far as we were concerned, Gregory Sanderson was dead to us. With Dad gone, it was like a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Leo threw himself into rebuilding the auto shop, finally able to focus without his father's constant belittling. The kids, sensing the shift in the household's mood, became more relaxed and carefree. It was like watching them come back to life. And me, I savored every moment, reveling in the newfound peace and harmony that had been so cruelly denied to us for far too long. Still, I couldn't quite shake the nagging feeling that Dad was out there somewhere, stewing in his own bitterness and remorse. A part of me wondered if he'd ever truly understand the depth of his transgressions, or if he'd simply double down on his victimhood. Those thoughts plagued me late one night as I lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of Leo beside me. In the stillness, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. "Speak of the devil." Against my better judgment, I stepped into the hallway and played the message, Dad's gravelly voice filling the silence. "Mara," he rasped, his tone tinged with desperation. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please, you have to let me explain. What you saw, what you think you know about me, it's only half the story." He paused, as if struggling to find the right words. "I made mistakes, horrible mistakes that I'll regret until the day I die. But there were reasons, extenuating circumstances that pushed me to the brink. If you'd only give me a chance, I could make you understand." The message clicked off, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. A part of me was tempted to delete it, to purge Dad's pleas from my life once and for all. But something held me back, a niggling sense of doubt. What if there was more to his story? What if, in our pursuit of vengeance, we'd missed a crucial piece of the puzzle? I stood there for a long moment, mulling over my options. Finally, I made a decision, one that would either offer my fractured family a shot at healing or tear open old wounds all over again. Taking a deep breath, I hit redial and pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding as it began to ring. No matter what came next, I owed it to myself to hear the whole truth, even if it destroyed me. The line clicked, and my heart jumped into my throat. "Dad, it's me." There was a long pause, as if he couldn't quite believe I was calling. "Mara? I got your message," I said, pushing past the lump in my throat. "And against my better judgment, I'm going to hear you out. But I need you to understand, whatever you say isn't going to change anything. We're still done." Another heavy silence stretched between us, charged with unspoken tension and too many years of hurt. "Fair enough," he said at last, his voice little more than a rasp. "You deserve the truth, no matter how painful it might be." He took a shuddering breath, as if bracing himself. "It all started after your mother passed." For the next hour, Dad laid everything bare, the crippling grief and loneliness that had driven him into the arms of his gambling addiction. The mounting debts, the desperation that led him to make that fateful decision to dip into Leo's loan money. "I never intended to betray him like that," Dad insisted, his words tinged with remorse. "I thought I could win it all back before anyone was the wiser, but I got in too deep, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late." He spoke of his shame, his cowardice in moving in with us instead of coming clean right away, how the guilt had slowly twisted him into the monster we'd come to know. I took my anger out on you, on Leo, because it was easier than facing the truth, that I'd become the greatest failure a father could be. As his tale unfolded, a part of me felt a strange sense of pity welling up. Here was a broken, pathetic old man laying his soul bare, owning up to his failings in a desperate bid for what? Redemption? Absolution? When he finally fell silent, I found myself at a loss for words. Part of me wanted to unleash the full force of my fury, to remind him of the lives he'd shattered beyond repair. But another part, the part that still faintly remembered the man he used to be, strong, proud, commanding respect, felt something else entirely. Regret. "Why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning?" I asked, my voice little more than a whisper. "Why did you let it go this far?" "Would you have listened?" he shot back, a flicker of his old defiance shining through. "Or would you have just seen it as another failure, more proof that the great Gregory Sanderson was a worthless drunk squandering his final years away?" His words hung heavy in the air, and I realized with a sinking feeling that he was right. We'd made too many assumptions, been too eager to paint him as the villain. We were all guilty in our own way. I trailed off, struggling to find the right response. In the end, I settled for a simple truth. "I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry we didn't give you a chance, that we just assumed the worst." An eternity seemed to pass before he finally spoke again. "No, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't apologize. Not after everything I put you through. If anyone deserves a reckoning, it's me." I could hear the acceptance in his tone, the resignation of a man who had finally made peace with his demons. "Maybe it's for the best," he continued. "You and Leo, you've got a real chance to start fresh now, build the life you deserve without my toxicity weighing you down." My throat tightened at the thought of never seeing him again, of shutting that door forever. But I knew, deep down, that he was right. Sometimes, breaking a family apart is the only way to save what's left of it. "Take care of yourself, Dad," I choked out, the words almost sticking in my throat. And I forgive you." There was a soft intake of breath on the other end, like a weight finally being lifted. "Thank you," he whispered. That's all I needed to hear." The line went dead, and I was left alone with the silence and a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Grief, anger, relief. It all swirled together into a confusing jumble. But one truth rang clear above the rest. It was finally, truly over. Dad's specter had been exorcised, leaving us free to forge our own path forward. As the dawn light crept through the curtains, I rejoined Leo in bed, snuggling close and savoring the warmth of his embrace. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, the promise of a fresh start glimmering on the horizon. It would be a long road, strewn with lingering hurts and hard-earned lessons, but we would walk it together, a family reforged in the fire of hard truths and even harder choices. And no matter what the future held, I knew one thing for certain. The cycle of hatred and bitterness ended here. A new day was dawning, rife with possibilities, and I intended to greet it with open arms.
Donna lived with her husband, Walter, who, in spite of his lack of employment, had grown more controlling. Walter, the stay-at-home spouse, took care of household chores while Donna went to work to provide for them. Although the purpose of their arrangement was to give stability, Donna felt her contributions were ineffective because of Walter's domineering behavior. One day, Walter gloated that he would let his parents live with them, implying that Donna may move in with her in-laws without her permission. His boldness astounded and confused Donna, especially because she was the one who owned the house. She had put up with Walter's domineering demeanor for far too long, and this incident was the breaking point for her. Walter was often giving orders as though he had the right to. One night, despite Donna's weariness from work, he insisted that she bring him ice cream so he could unwind. Donna said he could get it himself, and Walter smiled and hinted that there would be repercussions if he got furious. His actions were not only annoying, but also draining. Donna began to doubt whether it could last to live with someone who assumed supremacy just because he was the spouse, as she began to feel more and more devalued and mistreated. She came to the realization that she couldn't carry on in this manner if nothing changed. Donna believed it was time for Walter to take responsibility for his actions and realize the repercussions of his overbearing behavior. I realized then that managing Walter on top of my already demanding work would be the tipping point for my stress levels. I thus said to him, "I'm quite exhausted. I apologize. I'm heading to my room to relax." Not appreciating my answer, Walter obstructed my path and questioned me, saying, "Wait, why are you treating your husband like that? If I wanted to, I could throw you out now. Do you believe that upsetting your spouse in such a way is acceptable?" He appeared enraged. I was puzzled as to how he could be so domineering without giving anything in return, and how easily he could make me feel uncomfortable. But he couldn't even take the smallest annoyance himself. It resembled handling a toddler's tantrum. "I apologize, but I'm worn out," I said, feigning a grin, no longer willing to engage anymore. "Please just try to understand." "You're such a disappointment as a wife," Walter mumbled, letting out a big sigh. It was beyond my energy to dispute. I just said it again, "I'm sorry," and went back to my room. Walter's domineering actions were wearing me down day by day, but I was too tired to deal with him. Then one day, I developed a bad cold, which the doctor thought was a fever brought on by stress. My first thought was of Walter's relentless pressure. I had to take a day off from work since I was so sick that all I could do was lie in bed. Walter angrily exclaimed, "A cold." Upon learning of my condition, "That is merely a pretext. Go to work, you're useless." His harsh words seemed to make my fever spike even higher. He declared, "I won't be taking care of you. This is your mess. Deal with it." So I was left alone in my room, moaning from the fever with no one to help. I was too weak to prepare anything for myself, and I didn't want to face Walter again for fear of more verbal abuse. My temperature reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was so intense that my body was drenched in sweat. I couldn't even get up to change my soaked clothes. I lay there pondering how much easier things might be if I could just pass away. With these grim thoughts, I endured a painful night alone. Perhaps it was the fever talking, but in my heart, I knew something had to change. Throughout the night, as the sun disappeared and the stars took over the sky, a deep sense of loneliness and doubt overwhelmed me. I longed for Walter's support, not even to cure my fever, but just to bring me an ice pack, apply a cool compress, and ask if I was okay. Sadly, this was just a fantasy. Instead, the words I received from him harsh and uncaring, cutting deep and stirring up new anxieties. I questioned why I was the only one suffering, what I had done wrong, and why things couldn't be smoother between us. Once these thoughts began, I couldn't hold back the tears. The pain was just too much. After 5 days of rest, my fever subsided enough for me to return to work. My colleagues and bosses expressed their concern, asking if I was truly okay to be back. Although I was still recuperating, I felt compelled to support our household financially and couldn't afford more time off. Their genuine concern touched me deeply, such a stark contrast to Walter's indifference, and nearly brought me to tears again. At this point, a voice inside me screamed that I could no longer deal with Walter's behavior. I was pushing myself too hard, ignoring the signs that this way of life was unsustainable. Deep down, I knew that I couldn't keep going like this without eventually collapsing from the strain. By now, my feelings for Walter had significantly diminished, yet I lacked the energy to contemplate a separation. Amid these tumultuous feelings, I trudged through my days, working hard, returning home exhausted, and catering to Walter's unpredictable demands. This has become my daily routine. Then one day, while I was trying to find a moment of peace in my room, Walter called out, wanting to discuss something serious. It had been a long time since we had a real conversation. Typically, Walter would make significant decisions unilaterally. With a heavy heart, I sat down for the discussion, fearing what might come next. To my shock, Walter, with unexpected enthusiasm, announced, "I'll let my parents live in this house. You can't even cook, so leave." The first word that slipped out of my mouth was, "What?" He continued, "You need to leave because you're living with my in-laws." I was stunned, unable to accept the reality of his selfish demands. The situation had reached a breaking point, and I realized something had to change. As Walter steered the conversation forward, he revealed his plans to change the ownership of our house, transferring it to his name and his parents. He bluntly stated his intentions to divorce me and start a new life, declaring his decision final and immune to my opinions. I felt utterly disregarded, my feelings trampled under decisions made without my consent. Walter, inflated with his man-of-the-house ego, seemed only concerned with his desires. My heart sank as I realized the impossibility of continuing life with him. Ignoring my growing detachment, Walter jeered, "You love me so much, don't you?" I know this is shocking coming from a husband you love so dearly, but I'm sorry, I just want to take care of my family. Please understand. His words, meant to sound considerate, felt more like a scolding. I wanted to shout that he was wrong. Any affection I once felt for Walter had evaporated, leaving behind only disbelief at his selfishness and regret for not severing ties sooner. Why hadn't I left him earlier? If I had, perhaps he wouldn't have had the opportunity to exploit and demean me so thoroughly. I even resented my past self for being too lenient with him. Seeing my visible distress, Walter misread my pain as lingering love, thinking I couldn't bear the thought of a divorce. But he was mistaken. My feelings for him had long since faded into nothing more than disdain for a man who wrongly believed I still cared. Determined to set things straight, I said firmly, "Fine, then I'll leave." Walter gasped, "What?" He hadn't anticipated my readiness to accept the divorce and move on. He needed to understand that the old me, who always bailed him out, was gone for good. From now on, whatever happened to Walter, he would face it without me because our relationship was over. Seeing my resolve, Walter stood shocked and frozen. I seized the moment to head to my room and pack the essentials. I knew I couldn't take larger items today and would need to arrange for movers later. As I began to pack, Walter hurried over, perhaps finally realizing the gravity of the situation. Walter approached me, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers." I smiled softly and replied, "I've already fallen out of love with you. Letting go feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders." Hearing this, Walter stood there looking bewildered and lost. I nodded, thanked him for the years together, and walked out of the house. His worried expression lingered in my mind as I returned to my parents' home. Upon explaining everything to my parents, they initially reacted with fury at Walter's behavior, but soon calmed down, reassured by my resolve and the plan I had in place. I began to recuperate at my parents' home, taking the first steps by initiating the divorce proceedings. After I sent the divorce papers, Walter messaged me, "Are you sure about this? I don't know if it's really a good thing, but I don't have any feelings for you anymore. If we've gone this far, there's no turning back." His message concluded with a request to expedite the divorce. "I feel so much better now that you're gone, so fill out the divorce papers quickly," I replied, but received no response. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers from Walter, with his sections already filled out. I promptly completed my part and submitted it to the county office. Now, Walter and I were officially divorced. During the divorce, we divided our assets. Walter received the house as he had insisted, so I transferred ownership to him and chose to move on. The house had never really felt like home to me. It was more of a burden. Instead, I sought alimony from Walter, which his parents initially covered since he wasn't working. However, he was now job hunting, likely planning to repay them once he secured employment. But as is often the case, reality doesn't always align with plans. A month after the divorce was finalized, I had moved out of my parents' home into a new place, enjoying a more peaceful life. Then I received a call from Walter. Honestly, it was annoying. I could guess why he was calling, but ignoring him might lead to more complications. So knowing I'd have to address it sooner or later for the sake of my future, I answered the phone with a firm, "Hello, what do you want?" Completely fed up, I wanted him to get straight to the point. Reluctantly, I listened as he pleaded, "Please help me." His desperate tone made me chuckle. Walter was clearly in a tough spot, and while part of me felt distant, another part was mildly amused by the irony of his desperation. Walter's call caught me off guard. I hadn't expected things to have deteriorated so quickly. "Well, what's going on?" "You need to tell me the whole story," I replied, half amused by the situation. I suspected why Walter might be struggling, but I wanted him to lay it all out himself. With a hesitant voice and stumbling over his words, Walter began to explain. He had taken over the house after our divorce and managed it fine for a month. However, he now faced a rent payment he couldn't meet due to his unemployment. Desperate, he had asked my former parents-in-law, who were on a pension, for help, but the rent was much steeper than anyone anticipated. About $2,500, a sum they couldn't afford on their fixed income. My former in-laws were livid, accusing him of misleading them. "This isn't what we agreed to," they insisted, placing the blame squarely on Walter. Feeling lost and unsure, Walter called me, nearly in tears. "I didn't realize the rent would be so high. The place is a mess. Now, what are you going to do about it?" Frustrated and overwhelmed, Walter was now trying to pin the blame on me. Admittedly, I hadn't discussed the specifics of the rent before our separation, but it was Walter's folly to assume responsibility for the house without understanding the financial commitments involved. He had pushed me away, treating me like an outsider, and now he was facing the consequences of his decisions. Despite this, he seemed unable to accept responsibility and reached out to me for help. I couldn't help but sigh at his audacity. Ignoring the strain in his voice, Walter continued urgently, "Please, I need your help. We can't keep going like this. I need you." His desperation was palpable. The rent due date had likely already passed, which meant they might be behind on payments. The landlord of that house had a reputation for being temperamental and strict about rent deadlines. I remember being warned repeatedly when I was still living there, never be late with the rent. If they missed a payment, they would face serious repercussions. Walter, having met the landlord a few times, knew exactly how intimidating they could be. His call was a last-ditch effort driven by sheer desperation. When Walter called me pleading for help, he said, "Please, just cover the rent for 1 month. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right? If someone you care about is in trouble, you should help them out." His tone was still self-centered, as if he hadn't changed at all. I wanted to tell him straight that my feelings for him had long since faded, but instead, I held back and replied coldly, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any obligation to help you. You were the one who cut me off, and now you expect me to assist you when it's convenient for you. That's not fair." Walter tried to defend himself. "Please don't be so cold. I really can't handle this alone. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We were married once, right? Can't you help me out just this once? No, you were the one who left me. Even before that, my feelings for you had already cooled. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you, I responded firmly. Hearing Walter's dejected voice on the other end, he said, "I can't believe it," which struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had endured everything, even when Walter was selfish, took me for granted, or mistreated me, especially when I was sick. I stayed by his side, hoping to salvage our marriage. I worked tirelessly for the life we had, but this was the outcome. Why hadn't I left sooner when my love for him faded? Why didn't I distance myself earlier? These regrets flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt towards him. Walter never truly faced me. He never showed real concern, never protected me, and never embraced the idea of navigating life together as a team. All this time, he treated me like a maid, a mere money-making machine. Each time he acted this way, he seemed oblivious to my suffering. Yet now, despite all this being a result of his actions, he came pleading for help as if he were the victim. His self-centered attitude was repelling. "Please help me, I'm begging you." What about getting married again? Let's start over properly this time. I promise I'll never push you away again, Walter proposed desperately. I couldn't help but feel a mix of incredulity and annoyance. How could he think a simple plea for help could erase the years of neglect and misunderstanding? His desperation was evident, but so was the clarity of my decision not to fall back into the same pattern. I had moved on, and it was time for Walter to do the same. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at Walter's desperate suggestion. "Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your actions. I've been trying to find peace in my own way for a long time. I kept hoping you would face reality, and now you want me to start over with you, pretending none of that ever happened. Do you expect me to go back to those miserable days? That's never going to happen. I refused to return to that life, no matter what. I was overcome with emotion and began to cry. I couldn't determine if they were caused by melancholy or rage. Walter did not answer my words. He just stayed mute on the other end. I just muttered goodbye and hung up, unable to carry on the conversation any longer. Walter didn't return my call, so I blocked his number so I wouldn't ever hear from him again. I later learned that Walter and his family had been forced out of their house by mutual friends. Walter attempted to convince my ex-in-laws to pay his rent, but they were incensed and turned him down, which infuriated the landlord even more. They had to go since they had nowhere else to go. Walter is currently working part-time to make ends meet because he hasn't had much luck obtaining a full-time job. All three of my former in-laws are currently crowded into a dilapidated apartment after being forced to sell their property. I have, however, been utterly devoted to my work, and my supervisor and I have even talked about a promotion. I have the potential to be our company's first female manager, and both juniors and colleagues have expressed appreciation for me. Friends will occasionally ask if I'm considering getting married again. To be honest, I have a bad opinion about marriage because of my previous experiences. I'm not interested in dating or getting married again at the moment, but life is too long to rush things. This generation has a large number of people who are blissfully single their entire lives. Living a life without regrets and remaining loyal to who I am are the things that really matter to me. In light of this, I want to carry on moving at my own speed and facing every challenge head-on with fortitude and self-reliance. I should have been shaken when, on a business trip, Terry accused me of cheating and then, with his thunderous voice over the phone, requested a divorce. Still, I was unmoved. I was aware that this was just another of his flamboyant tantrums. From a distance, I could feel his emotions quiver, but I was ready. It was almost comical that he taught me fooled by his theatrical performance. I was alternating between light amusement and frustration as his unfounded allegations kept up against my unwavering resolve. However, during this exchange, I started to feel in control. This wasn't just a small argument. For me, it was a turning point. I smirked to myself at his pitiful attempt to change my mind. Then, in a sudden and crucial epiphany, I realized it was my turn to initiate contact. My name is Megan, and I've worked at a college bookstore continuously since I graduated from junior college at the age of 21. I'm 30 years old. Terry, on the other hand, is 3 years my senior, and his career has not been the best. He was always changing jobs or unemployed when we initially met 2 years ago. He proposed marriage right away, but I insisted on one condition: he had to have a reliable job. I was determined that we would not get married unless our financial future was secured. I saw his concerned look and said firmly, "Okay, but there's a condition. Marriage is off the table if you can't find a steady job. We must think about the future." With a casual remark, "Don't worry, you're working, so there's no rush, right?" He attempted to brush it off. Terry said, "But my parents would be worried if I got married without a steady job," after I made the requirement clear. Before we would give marriage a serious thought, he committed to finding employment. He started looking for work after gaining a greater sense of responsibility, and he finally obtained an office position at a construction business. We were able to proceed with our wedding arrangements as a result. Although I thought Terry's professional path and financial handling were a little risky at the time, I thought our styles would work well together. I wanted him to help me build on my abilities while I helped him become more frugal with money. But I had no idea that the biggest difficulties we faced were still to come. When we were looking into buying a house, around a year into our marriage, Terry delivered a bombshell. He casually remarked, "I might not be able to get a mortgage one day." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I insisted for further information. "I might need a guarantor for the mortgage because I haven't been in my job for very long," he clarified. "My dad is the only one who could assist, but he's overburdened by his debt from gambling." "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Considering that the real estate agent and the contract were sitting right there, I was shocked. Ever unfazed, Terry merely offered, "It should be all right if we put the house in your name, right? You'll have no trouble getting the loan because you've been at your employment for a long time. Each of us can pay a portion of the mortgage. It's merely a matter of detail." "That's not the point," I argued, feeling the frustration simmer. "Why didn't you bring this up earlier? This affects me too, and I'm not even prepared with the necessary paperwork." Although he apologized, his remorse seemed shallow, lacking genuine depth. Despite my desire to press the issue further, the contract was already on the table, pushing us into a corner. With the real estate agent present, I chose not to escalate the situation further. Reluctantly, I hurriedly gathered the necessary documents, like my income statement, needed for the loan application, and in a spur-of-the-moment decision, finalized the purchase of the house under my name. Doubts gnawed at me. Could I truly see a future with this man? Perhaps I should have firmly stated that we wouldn't proceed instead of rushing to prepare the paperwork. My anxiety only deepened with the potential problem of my father-in-law's financial instability. Just the other day, I was talking to Dad. Terry started one evening, his voice casual. He mentioned he might lose his house because of the debts I told you about, so he's thinking about moving in with us. Is that okay with you? Why would you even consider that without discussing it first? I responded instantly, frustration rising. Terry just shrugged. Well, he's in trouble, and my brother is working abroad and can't help. I'm the only one Dad can turn to. Maybe we could let him stay with us temporarily, at least until he sorts out his situation. But having him live with us permanently, that's a huge decision, I pointed out. Terry frowned. You just don't want him to stay, do you? If he moves in, we could split the living expenses. You're always talking about money, the money that you never seem to contribute, I retorted sharply. You promised we'd split the mortgage, but I'm the only one paying. You haven't contributed at all. In a marriage, finances are supposed to be shared. It's not just my money. It's supposed to be ours. It's only coming out of my account because the house is in my name. You're being incredibly self-centered. My voice was thick with exasperation, but Terry muttered under his breath, I hate discussing money, before storming out of the room. Such disputes became a regular occurrence in our home. Every time, Terry would dismiss my concerns, leaving unresolved tensions to simmer. Despite the unresolved tensions between us, Terry didn't ignore his family situation entirely. As part of his job in construction site administration, which often entailed dealing with real estate contracts, he actively sought advice from a particular agency on how to secure the best deal for selling his family's home, including all the necessary procedures. I often caught snippets of these discussions, and although they were a constant reminder of our issues, it was somewhat comforting to know he was taking action. However, the thought of my in-laws possibly moving in with us after the sale of their home loomed over me like a dark cloud. Terry began attending meetings with real estate agents and even included his parents, but without my involvement. His weekends started to fill up with trips away from home, and eventually he left for a prolonged business trip to oversee a construction site far away. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it, but the seeds of our ongoing power struggle had been planted. A few days after Terry left, I decided to indulge myself with a little shopping and a cup of tea at the cafe. A familiar face greeted me, someone who brought back memories of past interactions at our home. It was Bruce, a young employee from the real estate company Terry frequently consulted. Terry had mentioned before that Bruce was relatively new to the company, having been there less than a year. Ah, yes, I remember you. You visited our house before, right? I recalled. Yes, I apologize for dropping by unannounced that time and even joining for a meal, Bruce replied, seeming genuinely apologetic. There's no need to worry. I should have been more welcoming, I responded, reflecting on the past interaction. We ended up sharing tea together. Bruce was affable, and despite his youth, seemed more level-headed than Terry. As we chatted, we discovered some common ground, and our conversation flowed easily. Eventually, we bid each other farewell, each going our separate ways, but feeling a bit more connected than before. I never imagined that a simple meeting for tea could later be misconstrued into a devastating accusation of infidelity. Yet that's exactly what happened when Terry confronted me upon his return. You've been cheating on me while I was away, haven't you? We're getting a divorce. Give the house to my parents and leave immediately, Terry declared abruptly. His words struck me like a force, blindsiding me at a moment when I was least prepared. I stood there reeling as I considered whether the rumors I had heard were true. Rumors that Terry had been spreading lies, crafting a narrative of my supposed infidelity to rationalize his desire for a divorce. The supposed other man in this fabricated story was Bruce, the very person Terry had accused me of having an affair with. Bruce showed up at my doorstep the day after our innocuous tea meeting. I apologize for the unexpected visit yesterday. Terry asked me to reach out to you, Bruce admitted as he stood in my doorway. Confused but curious, I invited him in, eager to understand the full story. What Bruce revealed next left me utterly stunned. Terry had concocted a plan to frame me for infidelity as part of his strategy to secure a divorce. Bruce was unwillingly pulled into this scheme, tasked with fabricating evidence to support Terry's plot. Terry's deceit was driven by two primary motives. First, he was anxious about losing his parents' home due to their financial troubles and viewed living with his parents as an easy out. My resistance to this idea had pushed him to concoct a scheme to oust me and claim the house for himself. Secondly, Terry had been carrying on an affair of his own. He spent many weekends with his mistress under the guise of discussing issues with my parents-in-law. His growing infatuation with her had led him to see me, his wife, as an obstacle. By framing me for infidelity, he aimed to remove me from the picture and secure the house for his ends. Despite my initial belief that Terry lacked shrewdness, the complexity and maliciousness of his scheme were shockingly devious. As I expressed my disgust, Bruce apologized for his part in the plot. However, I had no intention of letting Terry succeed with his deceitful plans. I pretended to cooperate while secretly strategizing a countermove. With Bruce's insights into real estate, he suggested several tactics. Ultimately, he proposed a bold plan: sell the house while Terry was away. When Terry returned and was stunned by the news of the sale, I was ready with my confrontation. "I know everything, Terry. Bruce recorded all your schemes, including your attempts to frame me for cheating with him. If we go through with this divorce, I can seek alimony and take you to court," I declared, savoring the shock on his face. "Why?" he stammered, bewildered. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more revelation. You might not have realized, but Bruce isn't just any new employee. He's the son of the company's CEO. I pointed out, astonished at Terry's ignorance. "Didn't you notice Bruce shares the same last name as the CEO? How did that escape your notice?" My frustration was palpable. Terry tried to brush it off. "Well, Bruce's last name isn't exactly uncommon." "Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe his lack of awareness. "Yes, I'm serious," Terry replied, his astonishment clear. It slowly dawned on him that Bruce's involvement meant his company. A crucial client that handled much of his family's real estate dealings was now intimately aware of his deceit. If this news reached the CEO, Terry would be in serious trouble indeed. Bruce had likely already informed his father of the entire situation. "Look, fine," Terry began as he realized the precariousness of his position. "I'll check it out, but if you're lying, I'll figure it out," Terry said, his voice strained before abruptly hanging up. He soon realized the full impact of his schemes when the real estate company owned by Bruce's father decided to cut all business ties with him, refusing any further dealings or advice on his family property. With the sale of my house already finalized, Terry had no choice but to return to his family home after his business trip. Fortunately, Bruce had helped me find an affordable apartment, easing my transition as I began the divorce proceedings. Despite this, Terry continued to reach out, his voice desperate over the phone. "I'm sorry, Megan. Please forgive me," he pleaded. "It's too late for apologies," I replied firmly. "You tried to manipulate me by using someone else. Why should I believe anything you say now?" "Don't say that. After our divorce, you can be with that other woman, right? That's what you wanted, isn't it?" he retorted, trying to shift the blame. "Yeah, she had someone else she liked and dumped me." What a sorry tale. But just because of that, don't expect me to change my mind and come running back to you, I muttered, ending the call with a heavy sigh. Despite my efforts to keep my new address from him, Terry's calls were incessant. Each time he pleaded, "Please don't leave me. I'll change. I'll be a better husband." But I was tired of his empty promises. Once the divorce was finalized, I planned to delete his number, block him on WhatsApp, and cut off all contact completely. To complicate matters, even my mother-in-law reached out, her voice pleading, "Please, Megan, we'd be lost without you. It's not just about the house, right?" "But there's no house left," I reminded her sharply. "We're not that heartless." "Come back and you'll understand," she implored. "You wanted the money, didn't you?" I shot back, my frustration evident. "That's not true. You're being unfair. You tried to coerce me into living with you." She tried to reason, but I was beyond listening. Their motives had been clear, and I was determined not to fall back into their manipulative grasp. When I declined to comply, Terry turned to deception to gain an advantage during our divorce proceedings. I simply cannot place my trust in someone who employs such underhanded methods. I made my stance clear, pointing out his obvious financial motivations. Despite my firm rejections, the requests kept coming. Then my father-in-law intervened, his voice full of condescension, questioning whether I was neglecting my responsibilities as a daughter-in-law by not helping his wife more. He couldn't believe I would refuse, attributing my stance to personal debts I had supposedly accrued. I stood my ground, and in response, he raised his voice so much it was painful to listen. He accused me of being cruel, neglecting my mother-in-law during her time of need, and unfairly blaming her for my issues. He threatened to make me regret my decisions, calling me a wicked woman. After ending that distressing call, still resolute, I saved the audio recording and discussed it with my lawyer. It turned out that my father-in-law's aggressive words were legally considered threats. With this recorded proof, I warned Terry that I was prepared to take legal action unless he agreed to the divorce terms. Faced with no other options, he finally agreed, albeit reluctantly. This marked my liberation from the oppressive grasp of his family. Following the divorce, Terry's professional reputation took a hit. His colleagues' trust waned, and he faced diminished responsibilities at work. Financial strains forced him to sell his family home at a significantly lower price. Now he lives in a small apartment with his parents, dealing with a reduced income and the pressure of supporting his family. Additionally, he is required to pay me alimony. It was Bruce, who remained in touch as a reliable confidant, who told me about Terry's struggles. I came into an opportunity to put the customer service abilities I had honed at a clothes store to use while looking into new job paths. Bruce, who had recently transferred to a real estate company's HR division, advised me to seek for a position requiring excellent communication abilities. I decided to take the job offer and join the real estate company after thinking it over and talking with Bruce about the possibility. Bruce and I grew closer throughout this period of change, and our relationship finally developed into something more. We made the decision to tie the knot after a year of courting, and I was now the spouse of someone who would eventually hold the position of president of the business. That Terry, who had falsely accused us of being unfaithful, would witness us fall in love and get married was a surprising turn of events. Now that my new family, including my in-laws, are behind me, I can't wait to start a wonderful future with Bruce. We hope to make a lot of joyful experiences with one another, supported and encouraged by everyone around us. I recently bought a high-rise property that's conveniently situated directly across from the train station. Speaking about unanticipated subjects, why would he start chatting about this right away? After all, he did purchase it, and it's very amazing. The apartment has a breathtaking outlook, and the rooms are spotless. I'm a little lost here, though. Finding out that he purchased this opulent condo covertly while I was visiting my folks is startling. Is it really true? How did he even come up with the cash for this kind of thing? To my surprise, he casually said that the money from selling our old house was used for the down payment. He went so far as to say that there would be no space for me in their gorgeous home as he moved in with his parents. Without consulting me, he decided to move in with his parents and requested me to leave right away. I was in such shock that I was at a loss for words. I'm Carol, a 31-year-old stay-at-home mom who is 8 months along with her. Every day I look forward to meeting my baby. At 33, my spouse Terry is 2 years my senior and works for a reputable corporation. We have been married for 4 years, and after experiencing some infertility, I was ecstatic to become pregnant at last. But I'm also really anxious about giving birth for the first time. I often visit my in-laws' residence to gain some quiet and leisure during this stressful period. During one such visit, Madison, Terry's sister-in-law, asked me, "It looks like you're going to have a baby soon. Carol, how do you envision becoming a mother?" To be honest, I still don't feel like it's true. In actuality, Madison is Terry's brother's wife, which is one of the main reasons I love going to see my in-laws. Madison and I have become close, even though my brother-in-law and I don't actually talk. She lives with my in-laws and is a housewife as well, which is crucial because my mother-in-law's mobility deteriorated 2 years ago. Madison, who is married to the oldest son, has assumed the responsibility of looking after her during the day because the family was afraid of leaving her alone. Madison, who has experience as a caregiver, jumped in to help without hesitation when she learned about my mother-in-law's mobility challenges, even though she can do very well without a cane. The level of decisiveness with which Madison handled the problem really astonished me. Because Madison and my brother-in-law have a 4-year-old daughter, I feel less anxious about getting pregnant and giving birth because of Madison's experience as a mother. The weeks passed, and my baby's birth got closer. It was almost time to go to my parents' place to get ready for the birth, as I had just 1 month before my due date. I adored shopping for baby stuff and fantasized about our future together, even if my belly was heavy. After all this time, it felt good to spend some time at my parents' house. But 3 days after my due date, I started having contractions. I attempted to contact my spouse, but he was unreachable. Neither texts nor calls were returned. My labor pains were getting worse, so I stopped worrying about where he was. At first, I thought he might be stuck at work or in trouble. I was thinking entirely about our child's upcoming birth. Eventually, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Holding her in my arms for the first time brought an indescribable joy that overshadowed everything else. My husband, who had promised to be there, missed the birth. Exhausted from the delivery, I didn't have the energy to confront him immediately. So I sent him a text announcing the birth of our daughter and then fell asleep. When I awoke, I heard someone calling my name. "Are you still asleep? Huh? Terry, is it morning already?" My husband cheerily asked as I opened my eyes to see him and his parents standing there. Despite my previous request for privacy post-delivery, here they were. "Why didn't you come here yesterday?" I asked him, irritation clear in my voice. He didn't respond directly to my question, which was frustrating. It couldn't be helped. He replied casually, as if his absence and the sudden appearance of his parents were just minor issues. The situation was far from ideal, and I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions, from joy at my daughter's arrival to disappointment in my husband's actions. When I needed him most, my husband chose to have sushi with his parents, which he justified as a prior commitment. Even after their meal, he didn't show up at the hospital because he had been drinking and thought he'd be more of a nuisance than a help in his condition. It was disheartening to know he was out enjoying himself while I was in labor. When he finally visited, oblivious to my annoyance, he casually asked, "Where's our baby?" I told him she was in the nursery, a healthy baby girl. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law grimaced and muttered, "What? A girl?" Such a useless wife, shocking me with her harsh words. My father-in-law chimed in with disappointment as well, calling both Madison and me pathetic. It hurt that instead of gratitude for enduring childbirth, I received criticism. Even Terry wasn't pleased. Oh, damn it. I knew it was a girl, but hoped a little for a boy. He said, echoing his parents' sentiments about wanting a grandson, especially since the first grandchild was also a girl. Their disappointment was palpable, yet to me, the gender of our child didn't matter. She was precious regardless. Amidst this turmoil, Terry sided with his parents, deepening my dismay. Although I was seething with anger, the physical and emotional toll of childbirth left me too exhausted to confront them further. Thankfully, a nurse, overhearing our conversation, intervened and asked them to leave, providing me with some much-needed peace. Since then, Terry hasn't visited us in the hospital. On the day of our discharge, I call my parents to pick us up and take us to their home, not wanting to return to a house filled with tension. I pondered over the changes in Terry. He used to be more caring when we first married. I suspected his transformation might be linked to a significant mistake at work 2 years ago, which led to a considerable loss for his company. Although his colleagues managed to mitigate the fallout, preventing him from facing direct consequences, the incident had derailed his career trajectory significantly. No matter how hard he worked, he couldn't regain his former standing. This setback might have contributed to his detachment and recent coldness, even at home. Adding insult to injury, one of his juniors at the company had now become his boss, a colleague who was initially less confident than him. This reversal of roles at work might be impacting his behavior at home, making him more distant and less empathetic than before. Reflecting on his past mistakes at work, I could see that Terry was struggling to cope. The pressure seemed to make him increasingly irritable about minor things. Despite my growing dissatisfaction with his behavior, I held on to hope that the birth of our baby might inspire him to change. Yet it seemed he hadn't even tried to improve, leaving me deeply worried about our family's future. Amidst my anxiety, Terry suddenly called me. "Hey, when are you coming back? You've been at your parents' for nearly a month since the baby arrived." I wasn't ready to return home, but I replied, "Sorry, I'm coming home soon. It's time to start anew and get it together for our daughter." I then told him I had many baby items to bring back and asked if he could help us with the transport. His response left me stunned. "No, you don't have to bring all that stuff back. I mean, I have other business with you. Maybe I should have just told you this over the phone rather than ask you to come back." Confused, I pressed him for clarity. Then he dropped another bombshell. "I bought a high-rise condo right in front of the station." I was bewildered. "What do you mean? Why are you bringing this up all of a sudden?" He continued explaining how the condo offered a spectacular view and how clean it was. I struggled to follow his train of thought as he revealed he had moved out of our apartment and into this luxury condo while I was away. Where did the money come from? You shouldn't be able to afford a loan on your salary. I panicked. He nonchalantly added, "I made a down payment by selling our house." I was in shock, barely processing the information as he delivered these facts piecemeal, adding to my confusion. "What do you mean you sold our house? Where are your parents living now?" His excitement was evident as he quickly responded, "Daddy and Mommy are living with me in the condo now. I'm going to live with them in this great house, so I don't need a parasite like you around." I was floored by his declaration that he had decided to live with his parents without my consent and was now effectively kicking me out. Speechless, I couldn't muster a response as he abruptly began referring to his parents in childlike terms, and announced that they were all living together in the condo. Adding insult to injury, he then insulted me, saying, "You're cocky for just a housewife. You're useless without my salary. Besides, you've been nothing but a couch potato these days." His words cut deep, reflecting a harshness and disdain that left me questioning not only his love, but what our future held. His sudden, drastic changes in behavior and decisions about our lives without consultation were not only shocking but deeply hurtful. During my pregnancy, when I was dealing with severe morning sickness and busy with preparations for our child's arrival, my husband showed no sympathy. After our baby was born, he cruelly remarked that I was useless because the baby wasn't a boy. He even mentioned that his parents thought it would be better for him to be with a younger woman who could bear a son rather than staying with me. Additionally, he told me his parents no longer wanted to live with my brother and his wife, indicating a lot of family tension. He informed me that he had stored my belongings in a storage room and instructed me to collect them soon. The conversation turned even colder as he bluntly stated that he had sent me divorce papers and expected me to file them promptly. Then, without waiting for any response, he hung up. I was left in shock, struggling to understand how I had ended up married to such a heartless person. Despite feeling regret over my choice, I knew I had to pull myself together for the sake of our daughter. After some time to reflect, I resolved to sever ties with him and start anew. I decided not to let him dictate my life any longer. Divorce? Bring it on, I thought to myself, determined to show him that he would regret this more than me. My parents were furious when I explained the situation and immediately supported me in taking legal action as soon as I received the divorce papers. I signed and filed them. Half a month later, my husband unexpectedly showed up at my parents' home, angry about a substantial withdrawal from his bank account. He slammed his bank book on the table and demanded an explanation. Calmly, I responded, "Haven't you heard of the division of property? That's what this is. The bank account is in my name, and I won't give you a cent." Surprised by my assertiveness, he retorted, "You couldn't have earned that much money. Remember, your salary dropped because of your mistake at work, and you think you can claim this money." I stood my ground. "I've been working from home and managed to match your salary. Now we're going to divide our assets, especially since you're the one who wanted a divorce." He was taken aback. "You're kidding me," he said in disbelief. That's when my father, who had remained silent, spoke up. "If you want to dispute this further, we can settle it in court. How dare you treat my daughter this way?" The situation had escalated beyond mere personal grievances. It was now a matter of legal and financial assertion. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine and protect my and my daughter's future. I deeply regret that my daughter had to experience such turmoil because of Terry. One day, when he tried to confront us again, my father, who is a police officer, gave him a stern look that scared him off, and he quickly left our home. That was the moment I finally severed ties with Terry for good, and we also resolved the division of assets. Since then, I've been living with my parents, focusing on raising my daughter. Parenting has become more familiar to me, and my daughter's adorable nature makes every day joyful. Life has been good, filled with the happiness that only a child can bring. A few months into our new life, I started receiving persistent calls from an unknown number. Initially, I ignored them, thinking they might be work-related, but the caller was persistent. Eventually, I answered, and to my surprise, it was Terry. "Hello, Carol," he said hesitantly. "What do you want? How are you doing?" I asked, not interested in small talk. "Can you come back here? I'm having trouble paying my mortgage for the condo, and I might get kicked out soon," he confessed. "Oh, so you're short on cash?" I replied, not particularly sympathetic. Yes, I've used up all my savings. Dad injured his back and had to quit his job, and Mom has been spending recklessly, bragging to her friends about our life in the condo, he explained, his voice filled with desperation. I wasn't surprised. Terry had never managed his finances well, and without his father's income and his mother's spending habits, it was clear he couldn't afford the condo's expenses on his own. My bank balance is zero, and I've been told I need to leave if I can't pay by next week. Please come back, Carol. We loved each other once, he pleaded. After a brief laugh, I responded calmly, give me a break. You just want to use me whenever it suits you. You're hoping I'll come back not just for love, but for my salary and to handle all the housework, right? There was a pause. Also, remember when you called me a parasite. Would I not just be in the way now? He tried to backtrack. I just chose the wrong words back then. I pressed on. What about Madison and your brother? Are they still with your parents? He sighed. They moved out and are living on their own now. They had a big argument with our parents. My brother wanted Dad to live more sensibly, but that just made things worse. Terry's situation seemed dire, but it was a product of his own choices. A tangled mess of financial and familial errors. It was clear he was looking for an easy way out by trying to pull me back into his life. However, I had moved on, focused on a better, healthier future for myself and my daughter, free from the chaos and manipulation of my past with Terry. Then my brother-in-law, who is usually so composed, finally had enough. I heard he stormed out after telling his parents he cut ties with them if they continued to disrespect his wife, Madison. It's heartening to know he stands up for her. He seems like a decent guy. As for Terry, his plea for me to return was met with disbelief. Come back to you? Are you serious? I'm already overwhelmed just taking care of our daughter. I don't have the energy to deal with people like you. I couldn't help but comment on how odd it was for him to still call his parents Daddy and Mommy. It's just not suitable for someone his age. He tried to backtrack, suggesting I bring our daughter over to live with them. Weren't you planning to live with her when you first asked me to come back? I questioned. He fumbled, clearly having forgotten his lies. I would never let my daughter live with such a despicable father. Don't ever call me again, and if you show up, I'll have my dad arrest you. I warned him. He made a weak sound in return, maybe remembering the threatening aura of my father, but I hung up and blocked his number. He tried to call me on a different number shortly after, so I changed mine to completely shut him off. Madison contacted me again later and expressed her regret for her silence. She gave an explanation of how they had trouble setting up the internet after moving to the country. Madison encouraged me to visit their peaceful rural home, where she now lived with her family. When I first went to see her, I was enthralled with the peaceful, natural surroundings, a perfect environment for a child to grow up. My brother-in-law informed me during my visit that Terry and his parents were having financial difficulties after being forced to vacate their condo because of outstanding obligations, which was a dramatic departure from their prior way of life. It was poetic justice, if you will. I've been living nicely at my parents' place while working from home. I worked from anywhere for a few days because my job is flexible, so I spent some time unwinding at Madison's place. With hope for the future of my kid and myself, I wondered whether we would move closer to Madison in the future. When you think about the entire situation, unless you're really wealthy, purchasing a high-rise condo on a whim while your wife is pregnant sounds ridiculous. Taking such a risk on a regular paycheck seems odd. Either way, I'm glad she's no longer married to such a sketchy character. I intend to be content with my quiet life and possibly move close to Madison and her family, who have a happy family dynamic. I also want to provide a happy atmosphere for my daughter. I'll never forget telling my father I was engrossed in our talk. With a grave expression on his face, he drew me aside and asked, "Lauren, are you absolutely sure you're marrying this man, Larry? Though I'm sure you adore him, I don't believe he's the appropriate fit for you." Perplexed, I inquired, "Why are you stating this, Father? He respects and loves me. The fact that he is not as wealthy as we are is irrelevant to me." My dad let out a gentle but solid sigh. "Lauren, you are aware that I am a wealth builder. I would never despise someone for not coming from the same socioeconomic background. But I'm concerned about Larry for a reason. He has a dubious past, and his mother is no better." It surprised me. "Dad, what do you mean? I'm not sure I get it." After he pondered for a moment, he added, "I don't think this man actually loves you. Maybe it's simply a father's instinct. He is loving, yes, but I've heard him brag about your wealth. I heard him gloating to his pals about how he had bagged the rich brat." And Linda just smiled and nodded in agreement. I tried to defend Larry, feeling a twinge of pain in my heart. "Dad, you have to be confused. Linda also cares about me, and Larry would never say something like that about me. If he made another joke like that, she would definitely reprimand him." In my heart, though, I questioned whether my father's remarks held any merit. Sometimes I wish I'd listened to him. At the time, I was just a naive girl in love, desperate to hold on to something after losing my mother 3 years before. My dad was ill, and I knew he didn't have much time left. I clung to Larry and Linda because they gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. My father had built a comfortable life for us through hard work and smart investments. I had a decent job and earned a moderate salary, so overall we were doing well. Larry and Linda, on the other hand, didn't have as much. Larry made more money than I did, but he came from a modest background. His job didn't bring in the kind of money that could make someone rich, and I could tell that bothered him. He and Linda liked fancy and expensive things, and Larry often complained about not having enough money to buy them. I was always eager to help them out with the little allowance my father gave me. I even let Larry and Linda move into my house after we got married. But instead of being grateful, they seemed dissatisfied. They would say things like, "It's such a shame you live in a small house. Your dad lives in a mansion. So why did you buy such a tiny townhouse?" Looking back, I realize how much I overlooked because I wanted so badly to make things work. I ignored the little red flags and convinced myself that everything would be okay. But in the end, I wish I had trusted my father's instincts. I don't make a lot of money. Larry's dad lives in a mansion because he's wealthy, but I'm just a regular office worker with a modest salary. Buying this house was a real challenge for me, and I was only able to manage it because my dad helped with the down payment. Larry, however, wasn't impressed. He said, "Well, if your dad helped you out, he should have gotten you a better place. I'm sure your mom left him something to give you when you got older." I tried to explain, "I'm not entitled to anything, Linda. Whatever my mom left behind is my dad's now. She passed away suddenly, and there was no will. Honestly, I don't mind if I don't get anything. I'm content with the way things are." Linda scoffed, "That's a ridiculous thing to say, Lauren. I would have loved to inherit a lot of money. You know what? Your dad should trade houses with us. He lives alone, so he doesn't need all that space anyway. Right, Larry?" Larry nodded in agreement, adding, "Yeah, Lauren, you should ask him." I felt a surge of protectiveness and responded firmly, "Absolutely not. That house belongs to my dad, and he deserves to live comfortably as long as he's alive." Linda then remarked, Well, he won't be alive for long now that he's sick. We can wait and compromise for a few years and see what happens. Ultimately, everything will be yours after your dad passes. You'll have plenty of money to buy a big house and more. The way Linda and Larry were already making plans to spend my inheritance was deeply unsettling. It didn't help that they frequently urged me to ask my dad for more money. We weren't struggling financially. Larry and Linda just wanted the luxurious lifestyle they imagined, even though it wasn't within our reach. Honestly, I was growing tired of their behavior. However, the real drama unfolded after my father passed away. His battle with cancer ended sooner than I had expected, leaving me devastated. I was heartbroken, but Larry and Linda offered little support. Instead, they were more concerned about the date of the will reading and showed no interest in helping with the funeral arrangements. To make matters worse, they even refused to attend the funeral, saying that my dad was no one to them. At that moment, I was overwhelmed with grief and anger. My dad's warnings kept echoing in my mind, and I couldn't help but feel suspicious of Larry and Linda. I began to doubt their intentions, wondering if they had ever truly cared about me, or if they were only interested in what they could gain. I was starting to worry that Larry and Linda were only interested in my inheritance. When it came time for the reading of the will, they weren't allowed to be present, and they were furious. Larry snapped, "Why on earth aren't we allowed to be there? This is absurd." Brian was my father-in-law. Linda chimed in, equally outraged. "Yes, this is ridiculous. We're family, and we have every right to know what Brian left behind. At the very least, my son should be allowed to be there." I tried to keep calm and explained, "Your son isn't mentioned in the will, Linda, so he doesn't have the right to be there. Why are you two so fixated on inheritance? You didn't even bother to come to the funeral." It was ironic how suddenly my dad mattered to them when it came to the possibility of getting some money. I was really annoyed with both Linda and Larry, but what made things worse was how relentless they were. As soon as I got back from the reading, they pounced on me, eager for details. They weren't allowed to see the will themselves, and that only made them more persistent. I was struggling with the grief of losing my father, but instead of offering any words of comfort, they were only interested in one thing. Linda asked bluntly, "So we've been wondering for a while now, how much inheritance did you get from your parents? You must have received a lot of money. Tell us how much." I looked at them and said, "Unfortunately, my parents didn't leave me any money, so I didn't receive anything." Linda's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You didn't get any money? But your parents were rich. They should have left you something. I don't believe you didn't get any money. You're lying to us. There's no way your parents didn't leave you a single penny." Larry joined in, pressing me, "No money at all. The will didn't even mention you getting any kind of money. You can't be serious." I sighed and tried to stay patient. "No, Larry, there was no money in my inheritance. The lawyer told me that. You can even check my bank balance in a few days and see for yourself." "But what about all their wealth?" Linda asked, her voice edged with frustration. "You're their only child. Who's going to get everything they had?" I shook my head and said, "I don't know about that, Linda. The lawyer just told me I didn't get any money, and honestly, that's okay with me. It was my parents' money, and it's up to them who they chose to leave it to." Linda looked furious and blurted out, "That's ridiculous. You need to fight for that money. It should be yours." "There is no money, Larry," I repeated firmly. They didn't have much left in the end, and whatever was left, they gave to charity. They had been planning this for a while. Larry and Linda looked completely taken aback, anger simmering just below the surface. I couldn't understand why they were so upset. I almost gave in and told them everything, but something held me back. There was a growing doubt in my mind that my husband and mother-in-law were up to something that wasn't in my best interest. I decided to wait and see how they would react, but they didn't let up. Larry and Linda kept pressuring me for more information, as if they didn't believe what I had told them. The more they pushed, the more uneasy I felt, sensing that there was more to their behavior than just disappointment over the inheritance. I decided enough was enough. I told them firmly that I didn't get any money, and even offered to show them my bank account in a few days. A month passed, and nothing showed up. During this time, Larry became more distant and stopped being affectionate. He was always checking my account and constantly hounding me for information about my inheritance. It became clear where this was heading. Finally, one day I decided to put an end to it. I showed them my bank statements and said, "See, I told you that I didn't receive anything. I'm not hiding any secret inheritance money from you. Do you believe me now?" Larry looked at the statements and said, "Wow, our years of hard work just went down the drain then. So her parents weren't rich, and she didn't even get $3,500 in the will. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this." Linda echoed his sentiment. "I can't believe this either, Larry. I stayed in this marriage for nothing. I married Lauren for nothing. It was all a waste of time." Feeling hurt and confused, I asked, "What the hell does that mean, Larry? Why are you talking like this?" Linda answered for him, "Why do you think he's saying these things, Lauren? Who the hell would marry you without thinking about the money? My son simply married you so that we could rely on your inheritance. Now I see that you didn't even get a penny. I can't believe I wasted 3 freaking years on a useless girl like you. I could have done so much better." I was stunned to hear them speak that way about me. I finally realized that Larry married me for money. My parents were right about him and his mom. They were gold diggers. I was so done with my husband and mother-in-law. I was breaking inside, but what they said next turned me to stone. Linda looked at Larry solemnly and said, "What's done is done, Larry, but now it's time for you to divorce Lauren. There is no reason for you to stay with her anymore. You'll have time to find a new rich wife. This time, we will make sure she actually has some money to her name." I was in disbelief. "Are you freaking kidding me, Linda? You're asking Larry to divorce me over money. Larry, are you going to listen to her?" Larry didn't hesitate. "Of course I would listen to her, Lauren. I married you so that my mom and I could have a comfortable life. We grew up poor, and I didn't even go to college. I had no way of earning a lot of money." I was horrified. "So you pretended to love me and tricked me into marrying you? You thought my parents would give me lots of money." Larry nodded, and I felt my heart shatter. "Yes, Lauren, I thought your parents would leave you a lot of money. But now I see that they didn't. It was all for nothing." With those words, everything became clear. My parents were right all along. Larry and Linda were only interested in my inheritance, and now that it was gone, they had no use for me. I knew I had to leave them and start a new life, free from their greed and deception. I was willing to share everything with Larry, believing that our marriage was built on love and trust. But when he spoke, I realized how wrong I was. "Yes, that's what I thought too," he said coldly. "It was the only way I could give my mom the life she always wanted, but now I see that my efforts were pointless. Mom's right, I need to divorce you and keep looking." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. The casual, almost indifferent way he talked about ending our marriage made me question my own sanity. How could he be so detached, so unfeeling? Linda and Larry continued to voice their frustration, complaining about the marriage and about me, but I stopped listening. I was too overwhelmed, too lost in my thoughts, trying to process what they had just said. Their complete lack of emotion and Larry's sudden change in behavior were both heartbreaking and infuriating. At first, I felt a wave of anger rise up inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to let out all the pain and frustration that had been building up. But instead, I took a deep breath and remained calm. "Okay then, Larry," I said quietly. "If a divorce is what you want, you'll get it. I've never been one to refuse your demands, so I might as well give in to this one as a last favor." Linda, sensing an opportunity, quickly added, "So you'll agree to a mutual divorce. It'll save us both a lot of money. And don't even think about trying to get alimony from my son. We'll fight you every step of the way. It's best if you just agree to this." I nodded, realizing that I didn't have much choice. "You're right. I don't have a lot of money right now, so I've decided on something. I'll agree to a mutual divorce, but only if you sign a clause stating that we won't share any of our assets. We'll each walk away with what we have and nothing more." Larry agreed without hesitation. "That's not a problem at all. You don't have much, and neither do I at the moment. If you can forego alimony, I'll sign the divorce papers and won't claim anything from you." We discussed the details of the divorce, making sure we were on the same page. I could see the relief on their faces. They were both happy that I wasn't making a fuss. I guess they didn't expect me to be so calm about it. But the truth was, ever since that day, I had been crying on my way to and from work. I would sit in the parking lot of my office, crying for an hour before and after work, trying to pull myself together. Larry never noticed my puffy eyes, never asked why I was leaving early for work or coming home late. Linda didn't even bother looking at me after she found out I had no money. Their behavior only made me more determined to get out of the marriage as soon as possible. I knew I had to stay strong and move on with my life. Even though it hurt deeply, I was ready to close this chapter and start anew. The way they treated me, the way they were more interested in money than in our relationship, made me realize that I deserved better. I deserved to be with someone who loved me for who I am, not for what I could offer them financially. In the end, I agreed to the mutual divorce and made sure that we each kept our own assets. It was a painful process, but I knew it was the right decision. I had to let go of the life I thought I had and focus on building a new one free from the greed and deception that had poisoned my marriage. I decided that I needed some space from Larry and Linda, so I had them move out of my house and into a rented place nearby. They settled in quickly, and while we waited for the divorce to be finalized, Larry kept his word and didn't demand a share of my house. I also didn't ask for any alimony. In his eyes, it was a fair deal. But I had no idea how much I had underestimated the situation. The truth of it all came to light on the day our divorce was finalized. I went over to their new place to drop off my wedding and engagement rings. When I handed them over, I said, "Larry, I just wanted to return these to you. This marriage only brought bad times into my life, and I don't want to keep any reminders of it." Larry looked at me, surprised. "Are you sure you want to return them? You might need the money someday." Linda, never one to miss a chance to be snide, added, "It's so funny how you're giving them back. You must have laughed at our poverty before, but look where you are now. My son is being generous, giving you the rings back. You might need to sell them when your stupid job doesn't pay enough. We don't want the rings anyway. They're cheap ones." I kept my composure and replied, "What would I need to sell the rings for, Linda? I'm not embarrassed. You don't need to worry about my financial situation." Linda smirked and said, "Oh, we already know your parents didn't leave you anything. Probably because they lost everything due to bad financial decisions, leaving their daughter with nothing." At that point, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Linda looked puzzled, and so did Larry. I could see that Larry was annoyed by his mother's behavior and also surprised by my laughter. Linda snapped, "Why the hell are you laughing? Did I say something funny?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "It's hilarious that you think I'm destitute, Linda. It's also funny that you believe my parents lost all their fortune." Linda, clearly offended, retorted, "Well, of course, you're destitute. Your parents didn't even leave you a penny. They must have messed up and ruined your life by not leaving you an inheritance." I smiled and said calmly, "I never said I didn't receive an inheritance, Linda. I simply told you that I didn't get any money. My parents actually left me plenty of inheritance." Linda's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean you have an inheritance? I'm so confused." I continued, "My parents could see through you and Larry for what you are, little gold diggers. So they made a secret clause in their will. It stated that I wouldn't receive any monetary inheritance right away. Instead, I was given something much more valuable." Larry, now clearly agitated, asked, "What are you talking about? What did they leave you?" I looked at them both and said, "My parents left me this entire neighborhood as my inheritance." Linda and Larry were stunned. Linda stammered, "What? You own this neighborhood now? How is that possible? We would have known about your inheritance if that were true. We even signed the release with an estate manager who didn't tell us the name of the owner." I explained, "My parents wanted me to wait for a year before I could take full control of the properties, so everything was kept quiet. But now I own this entire neighborhood, including the place you're living in." Linda and Larry were left speechless. The realization that they had been living in a place I owned after all their scheming was too much for them to handle. The tables had turned completely, and they were finally exposed for who they truly were. I turned to leave, feeling a sense of closure and satisfaction. I had seen through their greed and managed to come out stronger on the other side. Now I was ready to move on and build a new life free from their manipulation and lies. I got my inheritance, and my parents wanted me to test if you were with me for love or money. Well, you both failed the test, so now you won't get anything from me. The estate manager was put in charge by my parents to take care of the property before I inherited it. They were very smart, you know." Larry scoffed, "That's impossible. I don't believe anything you're saying. You're just embarrassed because you don't have any money left." I replied, "Oh, really, Larry? Is that what you and your mother think? Why don't you call your landlord and ask him yourself?" Linda and Larry quickly called their landlord to check what I had said. Since their landlord was actually the estate manager, he told them everything. When they hung up, they looked shocked and panicked. "You lied to us." Linda stammered, "You tricked us into thinking you didn't have anything, but you own the entire housing society now. How dare you trick us like this? You wanted to keep all your wealth to yourself, so you made Larry divorce you and sign papers saying he wouldn't take anything from you." I couldn't help but laugh at their nerves. It was finally hitting them how badly they had messed up, and now it was time for some well-deserved karma. I said, "It's funny you're accusing me of being dishonest, Larry. You tricked me into marrying you by pretending you loved me, and Linda, you helped him with this plan and even told him to divorce me. If anyone here was scamming, it was the two of you. As for my inheritance, you asked how much money I got, and I answered truthfully. This was all a misunderstanding on your part. Linda tried to reason with me. What's done is in the past. Why don't we try again? We did spend 5 years together, and it would be a shame to throw it all away." I shook my head and said, "So now you want me back in your life. Funny how you were so eager to start fresh with a new girl. I hear you're already seeing someone rich. Don't worry, I'll let her know what a snake you are, Larry." Larry and Linda started begging me not to ruin his new relationship. Larry pleaded, saying that if I wasn't willing to give him another chance, I shouldn't mess up his future. I told him to get lost and also informed them that I would kick them out once the property was officially mine. They panicked and started begging even more. In the weeks that followed, Linda and Larry kept coming to my house, pleading for forgiveness. They already had an eviction on their record, so it was unlikely anyone else would rent to them. The only reason they were still staying on my property was because I had asked the estate manager to allow it. I also contacted Larry's new girlfriend and told her everything. She was horrified by what Larry and Linda had done and broke up with him immediately. She even showed me the text messages as proof. Larry and Linda came over after this disaster and started cursing and calling me names. I promptly made a police call and had them taken off my land. I promptly evicted them once the property was officially in my name. They had no idea that I would actually carry out my threat. I called the police, who issued them a strong warning when they reappeared. In addition, I requested a restraining order. As it turned out, everyone in the town was aware of what had occurred. After being rejected by their friends, Larry and Linda were forced to move out of the city and start over somewhere else. For now, though, I'm content with my newfound money and at last free of those gold-digging leeches.